Good evening, everyone. Tuning in from home on Zoom and here in our gallery exhibition space where we are experiencing a wonderful exhibition that we will talk about. Welcome to Florida CraftArt, either virtually or live. Our mission here at Florida CraftArt is to grow the statewide creative economy by engaging the community and advancing Florida's fine craft artists and their work. Our statewide nonprofit organization is headquartered here in sunny downtown St. Petersburg, Florida. And our Florida CraftArt Gallery features more than 12,000 works. You heard me correctly, 12,000. We just did a count, and we have over 220 of Florida's fine craft artists. In our exhibition gallery, we present 7 curated shows a year. As part of our exhibitions, we present educational programs related to the theme of the show. So please join us for our current exhibition, Art of the Garden. It runs through April 19th, and we are open 7 days a week and free all of those 7 days. It features handcrafted work by 50 artists who created 92 pieces from delicate jewelry, fiber art, and ceramic garden sculptures. Art of the Garden is made possible through generous sponsorships by Mark Anderson and Keith Bucklow. We all love beautiful gardens, but other than enjoying the beauty, can gardens make a difference in our world? The Audubon Society says native plant habitat is vital to preserving biodiversity. By creating a native plant garden, each patch of habitat becomes part of a collective effort to nurture and sustain the living landscape for birds and other animals. Native plants are good for the environment. They require much less watering, fertilizing, and pesticides. In fact, they can prevent water runoff, erosion, and improve air quality. Native plants can help decrease pollution because they eliminate the need for mowers and other equipment. These are all good reasons to consider using native plants in our gardens. To help us learn more about Florida native plants is Marquette Mcmanus from Wilcox Nursery and Landscape, where she has worked since 2018. Marquette has an Associate of Science degree in environmental science with a focus on natural resource conservation. She's currently pursuing a bachelor degree in science in sustainability management at St. Petersburg College. Outside of her work, Marquette enjoys exploring Florida's ecosystems, reading, and photography. She's currently the volunteer chair for the Pinellas chapter of Florida Native Plant Society. She passionately believes in using native plants to bring the community together and dreams of owning her own native plant nursery someday. And dreams do come true, so keep dreaming. She certainly does not let grass grow under her feet. Please join me in welcoming Marquette Mcmanus. Marquette.
Hello, everyone, and hello to those on Zoom. First off, thank you to the Florida CraftArt for having me tonight, and I'm happy to be here to give you a good introduction to native plants in the garden. One of the really great things about native plants is that they're very intrinsically valuable, so they're perfect for this theme of art in the garden. So, bringing life to your landscape with Florida native plants. So pretty much today we'll go over an introduction, what is a Florida native plant and other commonly used terms, the benefits of Florida native plants, the conditions to consider before planting, and then a variety of plants from ground covers to smaller shrubs. So pretty much, if you're not familiar with the term native plants, a native plant is a plant that was considered to be here before European sort of civilization. So anything that was here pretty much before the 1800s. And then there are endemic plants, which are plants that only originate in Florida or their natural region. So for example, we'll talk about green eyes, which is a Florida native endemic wildflower. So it only originates in Florida, it doesn't grow in Georgia or South Carolina. And then there's naturalized. You might be familiar with blanket flower. That was a very favorite, loved native plant that is actually now not considered to be a native species. It was brought in to beautify the roadsides by the Wildflower Association. And so it's not actually a native plant, but it is naturalized. So it's not invasive. It spreads well without limiting biodiversity of native species, but it's not actually a genuine native wildflower. So a lot of the native plants that I'll talk about today, and that in general we sell at Wilcox Nursery and other native nurseries, are actually endangered in their native habitats. They're very common in landscape uses, but in wild habitats, they are endangered. And that's a lot due to development and just pretty much our living in Florida. So we push out a lot of native species. And then there's Florida-friendly exotics, which are the exotics that grow in your yard without harming or taking up too much water or fertilizer. And then there are invasive species, and those are the plants that are determined that they limit biodiversity of native species, and therefore they are harmful to habitat. So a common question is, where can you purchase Florida native plants? I would love to say that there was more native nurseries in this county. At this point, I think we are the only native plant nursery. There used to be Twigs and Leaves. I'm not sure if they're still operational, but that was the St. Pete nursery that was a great retail nursery. And so I think we might be the only one in Pinellas, but don't let that discourage you from traveling. There are wonderful native nurseries south of us in Parrish, and then also in Tampa, there's Little Red Wagon, and all over the state, there's great native nurseries. So we are a member of the Florida Association of Native Nurseries, and that is pretty much an association based around getting the word out about other native nurseries. So their website is a wonderful resource if you have a friend who lives in a different part of Florida interested in natives, or if you are looking for a specific plant. You can look up all the retail and wholesale nurseries in Florida there, and you can also look up where to buy a specific plant. So that's a wonderful, wonderful resource. Florida Native Plant Society is a wonderful group that I'm a part of, the Pinellas chapter. They meet at Mockingbird Lake. Right now, due to COVID, it's mainly on Zoom, so it's pretty accessible. But when they are in person, they like to do plant swaps, which currently isn't really capable on Zoom. And then the Florida Wildflowers Association does a wonderful job with grants, and they also do a wonderful job providing seed. And you can also buy them retail seed. So that's a wonderful, if you want to start a meadow from seed. And then local plant swaps. I know that St. Pete has some, and Sarasota definitely has some. So what are the benefits of native plants? So pretty much as we developed this area, Pinellas County in specific has become, mainly our yards and a lot of turf grass, a lot of landscaping that is aesthetically pleasing to our eye, but not maybe aesthetically pleasing to nature's eye. So it's a good choice for less overall maintenance. You don't have to mow the lawn. You also don't need to fertilize as much or use as much water if you plant the plant in the right place. Less pest control. Turf grass is one of those things that you always have to treat for pest. Chinch bugs is a very common one. So with native plants, there's less monoculture, less just lawn and irrigation and fertilizer going on. So that's wonderful. So yeah, it's less turf grass. So sod is one of the single most input crops in the country. I think corn is another one. Pretty much sod, just to produce it, to get that pallet of sod that people put in their yard, is lots of water, lots of fertilizer, lots of pest management. So it's okay if you still want to have some lawn, but it is wonderful if you can make little islands of native plants and use native plants where sod just doesn't grow. A lot of people over the years get really frustrated with sod. So it's a really wonderful, less frustrating, enjoyable choice to kind of move away from or just use with sod. So like I said, less water usage. They say a lot, right plant, right place. So if you plant the plant in the right place, in theory, it won't need very much water. Typically with irrigation systems, they come on 2 times a week. So after the plant is established, that should be enough water to keep most native species happy. Some are more water hogging, but that comes back to the right plant, right place. So pretty much the main thing to drive home is the creation of habitat. Of course, it's less input to have native plants in your yard, but it's also taking back those green spaces for birds, for butterflies, and also for those less desirable pollinators, flies, beetles, the things we don't really want in our houses, but it does not harm us to have in our yards. So a lot of these art pieces in this gallery, you know, they're about things that people don't keep in a traditional garden, you know, leaves and bugs and things that, you know, creep us out, but they really are wonderful. Beetles and flies are huge pollinators, so they talk a lot about saving the bees, but it's also the beetles, the native bees, and things that aren't covered as often. Also, Florida is one of the most biodiverse states. It has plants that are endemic here, and they don't grow in any other state. So while it's a wonderful place to live and have suburban neighborhoods and vacation, it's also really great for us to keep those native areas and keep them clean. If any of you are familiar with Doug Tallamy, he writes a lot of books about the Homegrown National Park. And that's pretty much just sending out the message that every single yard is important, whether it's one native plant or hundreds of them. It is really important to form wildlife corridors with all of our roads and all of this construction. Things like birds, bees, butterflies, they need to be able to travel and have food source and shelter. So that's just really the main message here. Also, native host plants are the best choice for pollinators. I'll talk briefly about milkweed in a second, but I will keep it brief, I promise. But like I said, saving the bees, but not just the honeybees. Some people don't know that honeybees actually aren't from North America. They're from Europe. They were brought in to pollinate crops. So they're a wonderful thing that we get to enjoy now, but they are in decline, but so are native bees. So native bees actually are usually ground dwellers. So they prefer to actually have dead material in the yard or pine straw or areas where they can burrow. Some bees like to burrow in small holes. So just trying to keep your mind open to what your yard functions as a aesthetic yard, but also as a habitat for creatures. And also it's a wonderful experience. It's a beautiful thing to share with yourself, but also to share with your children or your grandchildren. There's so many plants people bring in their kids to the nursery and they absolutely love it, especially in this day and age. So it's just a wonderful interactive experience. People, you know, you can have your morning coffee and watch the bees, and it's really, really blows TV away. So milkweed is something we talk about a lot at the nursery. Mexican milkweed and other non-native species of milkweed have become very common at stores like Lowe's and Home Depot and other plant stores. They are not native to this area. They thrive and they spread really well, but the monarch needs to make a migration down from the northern part of North America all the way down to Brazil and Mexico and Puerto Rico. So they need to have food that allows them to do that. But in the winter, they need to leave Florida and they need to go down there. So by providing more food for them, it kind of confuses them. And also the Mexican milkweed doesn't die back. So it allows for bacteria to grow in the stems. And therefore, there's I think it's called IO disease or EO disease, and it harms monarchs. So if you have Mexican milkweed or a non-native milkweed, I do recommend cutting it back in the winter so that they can properly migrate. And these are the native species of milkweed that are commonly sold at native nurseries. So they do say swamp milkweed, but they are pretty drought tolerant considering in a traditional landscape, they can do pretty well. So, yes. Yeah, so most of the milkweed, and I've also had a lot of people come into the nursery and ask about is there milkweed native? Sometimes milkweed is sold as native and that's incorrect. So you always want to ask for a species name, not just the genus. But yeah, Lowe's, Home Depot, Ace Hardware, it's hard to get native milkweed there. It's hard to get native milkweed in general. We are usually pretty low in stock on native milkweed because, like I said, it goes dormant in the winter. So it's something we can only really sell from about March to late September. But there are wonderful options. And another thing I'll mention is a butterfly's life cycle is something that you can enjoy in your yard without needing to manipulate it and try and control it. A lot of people will get really stressed out over raising caterpillars. It's something that we're enjoying getting involved in. It's not something that needs to upset you. Even though I hate to say it, caterpillars are food for birds and other wildlife. So you're just helping with the ecosystem. You're not really controlling it. So milkweed is a very fun plant to have, though. So really quickly, understanding your hardiness zone. the different heat zones of the country is something to consider when gardening. I just kind of included for Pinellas County that Safety Harbor and North is 9B. Below that is 10A. The zone doesn't make too much of a difference with most plants, but it will come up. So I did include zones on each plant. So things to consider before planting. What was the original ecosystem of your yard? A lot of St. Pete was a lot of sandhill and pine flatwoods habitat. So you do want to consider that. A lot of properties have been constructed and a lot of topsoil or fill dirt has been put down, but it is something to consider when you're thinking about what will thrive here. What are the current soil conditions is an important thing to ask. I actually found out earlier that the Extension Service still does a soil test for a fee. That's located in Largo. You can drop off, or they'll send you a kit and then you send it off to the University of Florida. You can also get an affordable pH tester for your home uses. Mainly with the soil conditions, you want to find out if the pH is a good one for the plant you're planting, if it's more acidic or more alkaline. Typically plants like more acidic soil, but the things that grow on the beaches are really going to, or in limestone in general, are really going to like an alkaline soil. And that just all comes back to choosing the correct plants for your yard. I will say it does take a while sometimes to have that learning curve and understand what will grow, but after a while, you start to get the groove of it. So first things first, we'll talk about ground covers. Ground covers are an amazing option instead of sod. They are also really wonderful where sod won't grow, whether it's too shady or too sunny or too dry. So to start off, we have matchweed. And this is kind of a taller patch of matchweed. So matchweed is an evergreen ground cover that is a wonderful turf replacement. It's walkable and mowable. I always recommend it for dogs and kids. So it's a wonderful, easy to maintain plant. It's wonderful if you don't want to get rid of your turf grass and you just want to kind of plug in some spots. But the really great thing about this plant is that it's also a host plant. It's a host plant for the common buckeye, the Phaeon crescent, and the white peacock butterflies. That is a great question. I believe it is moderately salt tolerant, if not totally salt tolerant, but that is something I should check on. But 8A through 11, so it pretty much thrives in all of Florida. It's really a wonderful plant overall, very easy to maintain. And I would say it is walkable as well. So this is actually the white peacock butterfly. And I will note that the butterflies that eat these ground covers don't defoliate the plants like they might have in your experiences with milkweed. So these can kind of symbiotically live in the ground cover. And like I said, we're not manipulating habitat, we're letting it live. So you don't need to worry when you walk on your matchweed. The ecosystem is thriving and they're living there. But it's a beautiful small butterfly that you see commonly. And then this is the Phaeon crescent, and the Phaeon crescent is a very, very small butterfly, 3.5 centimeters in diameter. So it's a beautiful butterfly. You also see the pearl crescent occasionally, but they're pretty much the size of your thumbnail. So very underrated, very cool butterfly. So, if I didn't mention, matchweed can take full sun to park shade. The next one is sunshine mimosa. This one is very popular. It's known really for its sensitive leaves. They retract when you touch it. And then also for its pink puffball flowers. We have a question. But also for its pink puffball flowers, it kind of looks like something out of a Dr. Seuss book. But it's a wonderful drought-tolerant ground cover. It's also very, very hardy. It's very mowable and walkable. So this is one that kids really enjoy and have become a very enjoyable experience to share with people. But it's just really mainly a bee plant. It's wonderful. The bees will crawl all over the flowers. I've seen it in a lot of restoration areas used as a drought-tolerant ground cover for erosion. So it's very hardy. It does spread kind of aggressively by rhizome, seed, and taproot. With the deer, I would say that those two are pretty good. There's some that I'll mention that aren't deer tolerant, they're deer resistant. One that I will talk about is Rosenflower, and that's a taller plant that's in the sunflower family. So it has a scratchy leaf, and it is known for being deer resistant. But deer is one of those things that can definitely tear up a new landscape. So hammock twinflower is wonderful because it is a shade ground cover that also blooms. A lot of people want blooms in shade, and sometimes that's just not how blooming works. They need a lot of sun to produce blooms, but this one does bloom in shade. It's a ground cover that only grows by roots, not by runners, so it is very kept. I wouldn't recommend walking on this one as much as the last two, but it is a wonderful walkable-ish ground cover. It's not tall and trippable, but it's a nice small kept ground cover. And this one again is a host plant for that common buckeye butterfly. So the very cool thing is by using different ground covers, you can have multiple host plants in your yard for the same butterfly. So below, we have the common buckeye. And that's really, I mean, he's called common, but he's really a beautiful butterfly. And another thing about the hammock twinflower is it can take sun if you have adequate moisture. And there's also a similar species that is a sun-loving twinflower that is also a host plant. So for the next ground cover is one that I would not consider walkable, but one that a lot of people are familiar with. I would call it deer resistant. It's the Dune sunflower. This is a wonderful plant, but it can spread really, really well. It likes full sun. It gets taller. So like I said, not walkable, but it does a very lovely cascading effect. It's great by a curb or in an area that you don't want to mow. And it goes great around a mailbox. But wonderful nectar source, pretty drought tolerant. Really tried and true native plant. And this one is definitely salt tolerant as it grows on the beaches. But yeah. So the next ground cover I'll talk about is also a wonderful border plant. You can use this as a ground cover, but in my personal opinion, it's really great as a substitute for traditional plants like liriope or Aztec grass if you have enough sun. So year round, it just looks like a grass actually. The foliage looks like an iris, and in the spring, in the early spring, it's one of those plants that you can kind of mark as a beginning of spring plant. Mine in my yard just started blooming a couple days ago, and they have these miniature iris flowers. So they're absolutely beautiful. If you've ever driven in the highways of Florida, it's blooming on the side of the road in March and April, and it likes a moist soil, but it can take full sun. But just really wonderful, easy to maintain plant. That brings us to our wildflowers. And if I didn't mention this earlier, this is a very brief introduction to native plants. There are very unique and wonderful plants. I wish I could go through them all in this talk, but this is just kind of an introduction. So first things, the tick seeds. Our Florida native, or our Florida flower is actually the orange blossom, which is kind of funny because oranges aren't from Florida. So that's why I guess why we get a wildflower. I know they're trying to pick a new bird, but maybe we should pick a new flower soon. But so the Florida native wildflower, the Florida state wildflower is the tick seed, and I'll show you that in a second. But pretty much these plants, they love full sun. They grow really well in patches and reseed readily. There's two. One is the lance leaf tick seed, and that has a yellow center. This one's wonderful because it's a perennial, meaning that it comes back every single year. So this one is really wonderful, hardy plant to use in your landscape. And then this one, I hope you on Zoom can see, but this one is an annual, but it's also extremely showy. So in nature, you'll see them kind of growing together. They really make a wonderful prairie meadow type look. So wonderful native plants for butterflies and bees. And like I said, they reseed readily. Actually, a native bee on that one there, center if you can see. But really wonderful, smaller texture. A lot of the time with native plants, the beauty has to be the focus of the texture. You want to make sure to use a variety of textures so that when you look at it, it doesn't just look like a weedy garden. So everyone's favorite, tropical sage. Tropical sage is a plant that can take full sun or actually full shade. It's a salvia, so it has a traditional look. kind of a formal look in the garden if controlled. It does aggressively reseed. So if you plant one of these plants, you will probably end up with 30 by the next year. But that's one of the things about native plants is when you maintain them, it's not like, you know, cutting the hedges. You want to selectively weed out what you don't want or transplant your salvias to an area where they can look aesthetically pleasing together. So tropical sage is a drought and salt tolerant plant. It also comes in a variety of different colors, pink, white, and red. And if you were to plant the pink and the white, they will hybridize and create the red and the white, they'll hybridize and create the pink. If we do get a hummingbird coming by, they will use plants like tropical sage and also the firebush that we'll talk about. But hummingbirds, as you probably know, aren't very common in Florida. But that one thrives throughout the whole state. So this is Stokes Aster. Stokes Aster is one of my favorites. It's actually native to a very specific region in the Apalachicola State Forest. But it is adapted to growing in almost the entire state. It's a beautiful showy bloom. This bloom is bigger than this butterfly. And it's a really wonderful example of using a big bloom for bigger pollinators like butterflies. So it does like a little more moisture, regular irrigation, or a part shady area, full sun to part shade. But it is a very beautiful cut flower, wonderful kind of traditional plant, specimen plant to use in your landscape. And that one grows pretty well from seed as well. So it's not aggressive, but you might notice some clumps of Stokes Aster. So wild petunia is a wonderful underrated host plant. It is also a host plant for the common buckeye and the white peacock butterfly. And it can act as a ground cover. It's really popular because it can take shade, full sun to shade. It is hard sometimes when people think about doing a butterfly garden and bringing in beautiful pollinators, but in shade. So this is one, along with that hammock twin flower, that I would really recommend to bring in biodiversity and be a host plant, but also a nectar source. You might be familiar with the Mexican petunia, which is an invasive species. It grows a lot taller than this plant. But a lot of the time people are looking for substitutions to make. So this is a wonderful one to suggest to someone who does not want to give up their Mexican petunia. And little pollinators like it as well. So this is the one that I mentioned is deer resistant, definitely deer resistant. And this is starry rosenflower. It likes full sun to part shade, and it is very drought tolerant because it has a taproot. It is in the sunflower family, so it has prickly leaves that aren't always a favorite. But it's a wonderful source of seed for birds, and then also nectar for bigger pollinators. And it grows in a nice clump. So it's a wonderful, if you're looking for a taller wildflower, it's definitely closest you'll get to a sunflower. Right. And then we've got dotted horseman. Dotted horseman is one of our native edibles. So dotted horseman contains thymol, which is what's in thyme or oregano. So it is a wonderful plant to use in your teas or in your cooking. It's a great oregano substitute. And it's also good for a lot of things that oregano and other things would be good for. So it likes full sun to shade. You can buy it in a 1 gallon at our nursery, but I will say this one can get up to 5 feet. It is a mint, but it's a bush. So this is kind of a sub-shrub. I've noticed that bumblebees really particularly like it. And it's just a very unique bloom, something different to add to the garden instead of another tick-seed aster looking flower. It's kind of a unique artistic expression of native wildflower. And it can reseed. I would recommend cutting it back after it blooms and letting it refoliate. But this is a wonderful kind of subshrub. Blazing star is another favorite of a lot of people. There's a few different species, but the larger one is the one that I have listed here, Latris spicata. And it's a blazing star. So similar to a goldenrod, it gets a large spike flower, but it gets covered in purple blooms while the goldenrod gets yellow. But that's kind of just like a pollinator party. It's a wonderful source of nectar. If you're hiking, you'll see a variety of swallowtails, smaller insects, and also wasps and other things. all over it. It actually blooms in fall, which is a wonderful redeeming quality. And it also is really good at narrow spaces. Sometimes in a landscape, you do want to kind of tie this up to keep it from looking totally crazy. But this is another one that, like Dr. Seuss, we can appreciate for its abstract qualities. So it thrives in most of Florida. And there are smaller species if you want a big purple spike that only gets about 2 to 3 feet. And so from there, and goldenrods are wonderful as well. We also have a variety of those. I feel like in Florida, you don't see them as often as you would in other states. So it's interesting that, you know, they're really cool to us, but to other people, they're kind of in the background. So Florida green eyes, I mentioned earlier for being endemic. This photo actually is down the street. So they're a wonderful endemic drought tolerant wildflower. They're very small, like I said, yellow kind of daisy-like flowers. So they kind of all start to blend together. But this one's really cool because it smells like chocolate. Some people say burnt caramel, but it's a wonderful, wonderful smelling one. And it's great for smaller pollinators. It reseeds really well, not aggressively, but in a way that you can appreciate in a drought tolerant garden. This is one of the few that I would recommend for a garden with no irrigation. They can thrive with very little attention. So, and like I mentioned earlier, there's the goldenrods that we can appreciate, and another purple plant. So from here, we'll go to grasses. Grasses are something that I haven't always included in this talk, but I'm really glad that I added. So starting with the muley grass. Muley grass is a very common landscape plant. It blooms purple in October, so it's a beautiful marker of fall. There's fields of it. This is actually at Perico Preserve in Bradenton. Highly recommend. Easy hike and absolutely gorgeous scenery. It's a wonderful habitat restoration of an agricultural land. So it likes full sun. It's very drought tolerant. Some people prefer to prune it back after it blooms. You can do that, or you can just leave it naturally. But absolutely gorgeous grass. Provides some color in an area where you might not get it usually with native plants. But I don't know if you guys are familiar with the book Braden Sweetgrass. I think it's based in Maine. I might be incorrect with that. But I wasn't aware that sometimes muley grass is called sweetgrass. So in that book, it's mainly focused on Native Americans using the sweetgrass to braid and to make baskets with. But I didn't know that the Gula people, which are from West Africa, then they lived in South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, but they use that for basket weaving as well. They also use it with pine needles. So if you're in basket weaving or want to get started, there are some tutorials online, and it is a really beautiful practice. So that kind of is muley grass. So Fakahatchee grass is a larger grass that we use often in landscapes, kind of as a specimen grass. But it's very overlooked for being a larval host plant to multiple different types of skipper butterflies. Skippers are kind of looked at as moths often, but they are a valuable smaller butterfly. I didn't include any photos of them because they all look the same. But Fakahatchee grass is wonderful because it gets 4 to 6 feet tall and wide. That might be too big for some landscapes. So there is Dwarf Fakahatchee. But it's an evergreen perennial. It's moderately salt tolerant. I wouldn't put it on the ocean, but on the beach is fine. And it's just wonderful. It gets this seed head, which isn't doing its best justice there, but when it gets covered in some morning dew, it's really a gorgeous thing to see, kind of cascading in the distance. I will also add that grasses are wonderful, especially for those taller wildflowers like blazing star, to add some support. And also to allow for smaller animals to nest and to live in them. So in this photo, we actually have our pond at Wilcox. And in the back, you'll see that's the Fakahatchee we just talked about. And then in the foreground, we have what's called Dwarf Fakahatchee. And this is a grass that, just like the Fakahatchee, is evergreen. Its flowering quality is a small inflorescent, or a small seed head like the Fakahatchee. But this one's a lot more maintainable. It stays 2 to 3 feet, and it's just nice. It's endangered in natural habitats, and I learned that it's actually been crossed with maize to avoid the fungus that causes northern leaf blight. So I was not aware of that until recently. And it's also another houseplant for the skippers. So wonderful to incorporate different forms of host plants in your garden, using grasses maybe for erosion control or just to make some different textures, but also looking at them as host plants and not just milkweed or flowers in general. Another wonderful grass host is the lopsided Indian grass. This one is a very small grass most of the year, except for when it blooms, it gets a very tall, wispy, beautiful seed head. And it is another host plant for our friend the skipper. So wonderful, wonderful grass, very showy when it blooms, and the rest of the year it just kind of hides. So that's another thing with native plants and making a beautiful garden. You want to make sure to have a variety of different things that bloom at different times, you know, blazing stars in the fall, and then things that bloom in the summer. So that's definitely, winter's kind of hard, but you can do a variety of different bloom times, and it really adds different elements to your garden. This is a grass I've actually never personally experienced. This is called Toothache Grass, and my boss, Bruce Trilly, is now growing this with my former manager, Stefan. So soon to be available at Wilcox Nursery, but not yet. This is Toothache Grass, and this has a very abstract growth pattern that I just think is adorable. This is actually its seed head, so I would say that it probably reseeds pretty well, and it's known for its seeds. Small birds like the seeds, and it's another skipper host plant. But I think that's just fun. It's another Dr. Seuss kind of wild grass. Likes full sun to part shade. It grows all over the state, except for very south, and it's just an enjoyable grass. In my research, I noticed that some people did say that it did have a numbing effect on the mouth, and then other people said that it did not. So can't quote that, but there's a chance that it might have that effect. So here for the next grass, we have the Hogans, which are one that you will see a lot if you go to a preserve or a park. Typically they look brown, like you see here, but they really produce a wonderful meadow field effect. They get 3 feet tall, and they stay pretty narrow, but they do grow in large clumps like this. They allow for animals to have habitat at the bottom, and they provide nesting material to a lot of birds and animals. So they're wonderful. Another skipper host plant, and they grow throughout the state. There is chalky blue stem, which is a subspecies, and that has more of a blue color, while you'll notice this has more of an orange color, kind of a sunset hue, kind of very good photography opportunity there. So it's kind of fun in your home landscape to make it look, you know, like a meadow or like a natural habitat. That way you don't have to go hiking. You can just go and walk in the yard. So this is just a quick rundown of vines, but I couldn't leave them out. The Maypop passion vine is another host plant. This one is a host plant to the Gulf fritillary butterfly and the zebra longwing butterfly. They also have these gorgeous passion flowers that I'm sure you're familiar with. Passion vines are gorgeous regardless if they are host plants, but this one, they are host plants. So full to part shade, they do sucker pretty well, but in this case, the Gulf fritillaries and zebra longwings can eat your whole vine, so it's nice that they sucker. And I will show you those butterflies. So that one is the zebra longwing, and that one is the Gulf fritillary. They're very common butterflies. I have heard that if you plant the maypop in more shade, you get more zebra longwings. I'm not sure if that's true, but I have seen them on the same vine at the same time. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so I have that issue in my yard too. My main thing that I've been trying to do is have another vine that I can enjoy, and then have this one kind of as a food source that hopefully will come back. But I have had a couple die in my landscape because the caterpillars find it just way too fast. So that is something, one of the plants that I would recommend buying a bigger size if they have it, and then also just hoping for the best. Some people, when they don't have the butterflies and they haven't found the vine yet, they get enough time to get it big. And then when they find it, it's not as much of an issue. So coral honeysuckle is a very controllable native vine that likes full sun. This is one that I'd recommend maybe planting with that passion vine because it is so easy to control. So you could do that with the native passion vine, and it wouldn't be an aggressive vine in your garden, something that you can kind of keep at bay or grow on a trellis like you see here. Attracts bees and hummingbirds, wonderful nectar source. And yeah, a vine that I would not call controllable is the Ocean Blue Morning Glory. Like many morning glories, it is very aggressive. I would compare this one even to a moonflower in the way that it grows. It's gorgeous. The blooms are absolutely stunning, but it is something that you want to make sure you are keeping an eye on and planting in the right place. They can definitely easily end up in your neighbor's yard or your neighbor's yard. But they're a wonderful nectar source for a variety of pollinators, especially skippers. So they're a very beautiful, fun vine to have. Alrighty, and then shrubs, and then we will get to questions. So native shrubs, starting with a tried and true one is the firebush. You'll see a lot of exotic firebush planted in commercial landscapes, but the native is a really wonderful plant. There's the zebra longwing enjoying the firebush blooms. They are, for some reason, favored by zebra longwings, but they're a full sun, part shade shrub. They get about 8 feet at mature height and bloom profusely, but they are very prunable. I wouldn't call it drought tolerant. It does like a little bit of water, especially in that summer heat. So these are two different shrubs, actually. This is the Bahama Cassia, which is a smaller shrub native to Miami-Dade County, although it does grow throughout Florida. It gets about 3 to 5 feet tall and wide. It's kind of more wider than tall, and it's a full sun shrub, very drought tolerant. I wouldn't call it very cold tolerant. You do want to consider it on a night of a freeze, but wonderful, smaller senna plant. And it is a host plant for all of the sulfur butterflies, which is really cool. And I'll show you those next. And then it's got a sibling, the privet cassia, which is very good for a shadier environment. It takes full sun to part shade, and it gets taller. So if you're looking for a taller plant or one that you're open to pruning, it's a different leaf shape and texture, and it can take more part shade. It also grows throughout the state, so it's not as cold tolerant or cold. It is more cold tolerant, and it is also still drought tolerant. So these are host plants to this wonderful little guy. And they actually are a very cool butterfly because they eat not just the foliage, but also the flowers. So like the matchwood and the ground covers, they won't defoliate your cassia. They hopefully will just really snack on the flowers and minimal leaf damage. But yeah, wonderful, fun one to watch, definitely. And it's always fun when you see the yellow butterfly flying around. This is one of my favorite plants. So Simpson Stopper is a shrub that grows in full sun to part shade. It can get up to 20 feet tall. We have one at the nursery that is proven to be a tree. But it is just wonderful because of its beautiful white flowers that are also fragrant. They smell kind of like honey. And then also its beautiful red berries when it does berry. The berries are edible. I'm not crazy about them personally, and I don't think you can really use them in your cooking like some of the other natives. But they taste kind of like pineapple. But they're really for the wildlife. You'll see lots of birds just like eating these berries. The blooms bring in a swarm of different types of pollinators. So it's really a wonderful VIP plant to me. You can use it as a shrub, as a small shrub, a larger shrub, or a tree. And it's just really a wonderful top 5 plants for me. So here's a mockingbird, and in the summer usually there's 10 plus mockingbirds in our stopper, and they really enjoy it. So for that one's more for sun. So for shade, we have shiny coffee, like part shade to shade. There are dwarf cultivars that stay only 2 to 3 feet, but this is referring to the regular size. There are also different types of coffee, but shiny coffee has a really nice shiny vinyl leaf, white flowers and red berries for the birds. The berries are not actually coffee berries, and I don't believe they're supposed to be edible, but they're really luscious and gorgeous. Just all over, this one is a very classy, nice kept addition to the landscape. But yeah, the dwarf cultivar is really wonderful if you need a small shrub line. Walter's Viburnum is another one that comes in full-size species, and then also a lot of dwarf cultivars. This is referring to the Withlacoochee Walter's Viburnum, which is a full-size species. And so they get 10 to 15 feet tall. You'll see them as standards, and they're gorgeous right now. They're another early spring bloomer that kind of tells you it's spring. But they get covered in white flowers. If you allow them to berry, they'll get wonderful berries too. Most people do prune them into a shrub or a specimen plant. But wonderful for butterflies, wonderful for bees and birds, and really commonly found at nurseries, and then also just in landscaping in general. It's like you can't go to a Publix without seeing a Dwarf Walters viburnum, but that's a good thing. And then this one is beautyberry. So beautyberry is a common name for a genus of plants called Calicarpa, and wonderful, wonderful edible plant. You can make jams and jellies out of it. The leaves are also known to be a good mosquito repellent if you don't have anything else. So if you're ever hiking, you can grab a leaf, it won't mind. But it's a wonderful, wonderful bird plant, smaller pollinators, but it's really fun to make that jam and jelly. My older coworker, Hillary, used to make it all the time. So I guess we're going to have to start because she just retired, but really wonderful, wonderful edible plant. I would recommend. But full sun to part shade, a very beautiful addition to the landscape, 4 to 8 feet tall. So it's really nice on like a corner or under some other things, but really, really wonderful, wonderful plant. So this is gray leaf. Gray leaf is one that we just started carrying, I want to say about 3 years ago, and it loves full sun, and it is very drought tolerant, and it gets just absolutely swarmed by a variety of different beneficial pollinators, different beetles, different wasps, and also your monarchs, your regular bees and butterflies. But there's so much biodiversity on this one plant. It's really just wonderful. It is from the Miami-Dade County, and so it does say 10B plus here. I think you could plant this in Palm Harbor or anywhere in Pinellas County. I'm seeing it in everyone's yard now that people are seeing it. But it's one of those plants that have a silver foliage, so it adds a really great contrast and texture in the garden. I didn't put silver buttonwood in here, but that's a very common one that people use to have a lighter contrast. So gray leaf's wonderful, and it gets pink flowers, which is kind of more unique in nature. So yeah, really wonderful newer plant to us. So that's in my top favorite plants as well. And here is our information. If you wanted to check us out, my coworker Davis has a wonderful YouTube channel where you can kind of hang out and watch different educational videos about native plants. We also have a wonderful website. We started an online store about a year ago. So if you're ever wondering what's available at Wilcox, our online inventory is 99.9% accurate. We also have a Wilcox, or we also have an Instagram, a Facebook, and feel free to, if you have any questions about any of the things I spoke about this evening, or any questions about your plants in your yard, anything you buy from us, any help you need, just feel free to call us, and anyone's happy to help you. Yeah, of course.
One more thing, Miss PJ says, don't kill lovers. They don't eat just everything. Mice and some treated like the photo. Baby plant anchored in China, I think. So it's the comment online.
Very cool comment about the mimosa. And then the other comment was to not kill lovers. I think certain pest species, like I said, we don't want to manipulate the environment. So lovers are not native, and I don't know if they're invasive, but I think they might be. But if they're not bothering you, then don't worry about it. I kind of let them do their thing, but I don't personally have an infestation. So lover, when I was a kid, I thought they were grasshoppers, but they're about this big, and they come, I think they might be called two different things, but they're yellow or black. And they're very cute the first time you see them, but you'll see that they gnaw plants. They'll just cut up plants. So they're kind of a pest in the way that snails are, except they move a lot faster than snails. Yeah. Like I said, so we're debating killing lovers or not. If you have an infestation, I think that for a lot of people, it might actually be beneficial to take the time to kill them or to use no-low bait. If they're not in your yard, then if you see one, it's okay. But yeah. They like someone said that they don't fly, so you can't throw them away. You can flick them. That's kind of my best management practice.
And PJ says they're native.
I'm not too much of an expert on lovers. If they are native, then don't harm them. But that is a good question and a good topic to definitely research before killing. Yeah, there's a lot of, we sell canna lilies at our nursery. There's a lot of people who get really upset that the cannas are eating the canna lilies. So if it's beneficial to them, I would recommend leaving them unless, like I said, you have an infestation and you can't grow anything. It's like how deer are native. We had a person here who had a deer problem. You know, feeding the wildlife is wonderful. If you need to put some sort of barrier though to keep your plants alive, it's okay. It's wonderful that we're gardening to give back to nature, but for a lot of people they aren't. So you don't want to hold yourself to too high standards with this. You want to realize that you're doing something beneficial rather than just having a yard that is actually harmful. So any other questions? Yeah, anytime. Thank you all for listening. If you're here remotely on Zoom, thank you so much for attending. It's wonderful to see you guys. And thank you. And thank you for CraftArt.
Thank you, Marquette. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Continue to join us. We are, as I said earlier, free, open to the public 7 days a week. So come in and experience the gallery shop and the gallery exhibition. And our Art in the Garden exhibition will be up through April. So come join us.